I'm Jack Fink. Coming up on Eye on Politics, we speak one-on-one with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick about property tax relief, school choice, and whether his priorities will also be passed in the House before the regular legislative session ends. Plus, Texas House Democrats are holding rallies across the state to protest legislation they say will take Texas backwards. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas starts right now. Hello and welcome. From school security to school choice, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick spoke with me about his and the state Senate's top priorities. The state Senate is increasing the amount of money spent on school security from $600 million to about $1.5 billion. After the Uvalde tragedy, Governor Abbott ordered new safety audits at each school campus, and those would now become part of state law under this bill. The legislation would also give the Texas Education Agency new authority to make sure school districts are complying with the regulations. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick tells me parents and educators need to do their part.
We don't have 8,000 inspectors to go to every school, so they have to use the funding wisely as we recommend, and we will, and the TA will hold them accountable. No, look, every superintendent, every principal, every teacher wants to do their very best to save and protect their children, but we have to take this serious.
School security is one of the Senate's top 30 priorities, and the Lieutenant Governor says most will have passed the Senate this week. But will they pass the House before the legislative session ends Memorial Day weekend?
And I am concerned the clock will run out on getting them all accomplished, but I just don't know which ones may not make the deadline.
Parents matter when it comes to educating our kids.
Regarding another priority, the Lieutenant Governor praised Governor Abbott's statewide tour, including a stop at Nolan Catholic High School in Fort Worth this afternoon, to push for school choice and taxpayer-funded savings accounts for some public school students to attend private schools. The Senate passed its bill earlier this month, but the House passed an amendment in its budget that no tax dollars will be used for what critics call school vouchers. Still, Patrick told me he isn't giving up on the House.
I'm very optimistic, more than I've ever been in the House, that we may get a school choice bill out from them. I don't know what it will look like. We'll have to go to conference and work it out, but I'm optimistic because that vote, when you look at the technical side of the vote, it's much closer to happening than ever before, but we'll see what happens.
The Texas House will debate its two school security bills Monday. Investigative reporter Brian New takes a deeper dive now into how the legislation is designed to keep your students safe at school.
Securing doors has long been a focus of school safety. But this year, it's not just schools checking their own doors, but at the order of Governor Greg Abbott, state inspectors have been going to schools unannounced, trying to get inside.
Are these audits making your school district safer?
Oh yeah, no doubt. And I think what it does is really allows us to have really an outside perspective coming in to help us.
By the end of the school year, close to 75% of schools in the Eagle Mountain Saginaw School District will have had a surprise safety audit. That will be the case at most districts. Come next year,
can you slow down an intruder?
State lawmakers are pushing for more.
We've got to have stricter control, and it's important to have somebody go by those schools and check them.
Under a school safety bill passed this week by the Texas Senate, next year every campus in the state, all 8,000 plus, will undergo an unannounced intruder audit. The bill also calls for regional safety teams to conduct a second, more extensive safety vulnerability inspection. Every campus would undergo this more intensive audit every 4 years. School Police Chief Charles Ramirez says the more people checking, the safer our schools will be.
I think it's a great idea because it sometimes, unless you have someone from the outside checking sometimes, that you may not know what you're missing.
One of the concerns with the audits this year has been trying to strike that balance between having an unannounced inspection and not causing panic at a school. Under this new bill, the superintendent of the district would be notified 7 days in advance of an inspection, but would not be told which campus. With the I-Team, Brian New, CBS News, Texas.
Now to some other political headlines around North Texas and across the state. Dallas County Democratic Party Chair Christy Noble has announced she's stepping down. No word yet who will succeed her. And a second Democrat is now reportedly considering a run for U.S. Senate. The San Antonio Express News reports Democratic State Senator Roland Gutierrez, whose district includes Uvalde, will very likely run against Senator Ted Cruz. The Dallas Morning News previously reported that Dallas area Congressman Colin Allred is also considering a run against Cruz. Now to our one-on-one interview with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who spoke about why he won't negotiate with the House on property tax relief and whether casino gambling and sports betting are dead on arrival in the Senate. Less than 6 weeks until the end of the regular session, and I'm wondering what priorities in the Senate of yours and the top 30 are you concerned will not pass in the House?
You know, the question, Jack, is really the clock. The House they're catching up. They have been pretty far behind in hearing and passing bills over to us. And so you get down to the last, it's really not 6 weeks because the last week there's some deadlines that bills have to be in one chamber or the other. So it's really about 5 weeks. And our top 30 priorities after today, we will have passed out 29. We had passed out 26 last week at that point in time. So all of our priorities will be out and to them. Obviously, these are my priorities, the governor's priorities. Some we share with the House. We may have a different view on those, but mostly it's the people's priorities. You know, we get our ideas from when we're out there meeting folks and listening to folks and people that come to the Capitol. So it's the people's priorities. And I am concerned the clock will run out on getting them all accomplished, but I just don't know which ones may not make the deadline.
Last week, you drew a political line in the sand when it came to property tax relief and that you were not going to negotiate when it comes to the increasing the homestead exemptions that were passed by the Senate. Since then, have you had a chance to speak with Speaker Phelan directly and with Governor Abbott during your weekly breakfasts?
So I have spoken and met with the governor this week. Dade and I have not sat down this week, but our teams and our staffs and different members are communicating. And that's what happens a lot, Jack. It's senator to senator, it's staff to staff very often as you go through that process. Jack, let me tell you why I'm holding firm on the homestead exemption. When I was elected, the homestead exemption was $15,000 in 2015 as lieutenant governor. It had been that way forever. I increased it to $25,000. And I don't normally say it's always a we, but it was something that I really wanted to do. And the Senate did it and the House agreed. And then last year we increased it to 40. And this year we want to increase the homestead exemption for everyone under 65 by 70,000 and for seniors 65 and over 100,000, Jack. Now, let me tell you what that means. That means for every senior, that's about $1,000 a year, a little bit more than that, for as long as they keep their home. Hope you can see the money right there. I'm holding $1,000 in my hand. So if a senior keeps their home, say 15 years until they're 80, some less, some more, I'm just using an average of 15 years, that's $15,000, Jack, that the House does not have in their budget. And for everyone under 65, it's $800 for every year they homestead their home. And a lot of that is a 30-year mortgage. So that's about $25,000, not in the House bill, it's in the Senate bill, because appraisal caps don't impact taxes anymore. It could a little bit in some cases, but the bill we passed, Jack, in 2019 essentially takes the appraisals out of the equation. But the bottom line is this: the Senate plan delivers about $27 billion more in tax savings because of the homestead exemption. And when people under 65 say, why the seniors get more? There's always been a higher exemption for seniors. They get a little bit more, but $15,000 for every senior, $25,000 over a 30-year mortgage for every person under 65. Jack, I'm not walking away from that. You can't argue math. Both the Senate and the House have a lot of compression in there, which reduces the school rate. Both of us have some issues we can agree on, I think can come together. But the appraisal cap at 5%, Jack, does nothing for a senior because seniors' appraisals are already capped. So they get nothing out of that. And seniors represent over 2 million of our nearly 6 million homes. So I can't walk away from $27 billion in extra savings over the time and the life of their home while they live in it, because the House just doesn't understand math.
Does the governor support the Senate version or the House version?
Jack, you always ask me to answer questions about what other people do. Just ask me where I am, because that would be unfair for me to talk about conversations. The governor wants us to give the biggest savings we can to property owners and homeowners, and that's what we're going to do.
Is there room?
And Jack, let me make this one point to really clarify this, since I know the elongated version, people can listen to this part of it. The reason the 5% doesn't work anymore is because in 19, we separated appraisals from your tax bill. It used to be if your appraisal went up 7, 8, 9, 10%, so did your tax bill. But when people look at the appraisals that their homes went up last spring and their final tax bill in October, they'll see their appraisals went up, but their tax bill was much lower because we disconnected that. And the way we did that is we said, counties cannot increase their budgets more than 3.5% and school districts more than 2.5%. So as your value goes up, Jack, like a seesaw, they have to lower the rate to get to 3.5%. That's why the appraisals, essentially, there always can be an exception, an outlier somewhere, really don't factor. And again, seniors get no benefit from the house plan. So that's why I'm sticking tight. This is a lot of money. $25,000 over a lifetime of a mortgage for someone under 65 and $15,000 for a senior over, say, a 15-year time they live in their home over 65. You can't walk away from that, Jack. It's real money, a lot of money.
Let me ask you about school choice. Given the fact that the House passed an amendment saying no taxpayer funds will be used for education savings accounts, how concerned are you that the school choice education savings accounts is going to be dead on arrival in the House? And what do you make of Governor Abbott's statewide tour promoting school choice?
So I appreciate the governor out there working while the Senate's here passing school choice. We just passed the biggest school choice bill in the country several weeks ago. So it just passed. We passed most of our priorities out, Jack, as you know, 2 and 3 weeks ago. We're just finishing up the last several bills in the last week or so. So these bills have been over there. Look, 80%, Jack, of Republicans support parental choice, which includes school choice. About 60 to 65% of independents and almost 50% of Democrats support parental choice. It's the ultimate choice. But we also know this, Jack, from looking at all of the other states, Florida has had school choice the longest. On average, about 3 or 4% of parents and students decide to opt for an education savings account, which we're creating, of $8,000 for a person to use for a private school of their choice. And the reason only 3 or 4% pick up, Jack, is like Texas. You know, we have some really great public schools. Most of them are good, but some are failures. And so those that can't help the student in the eyes of the parent reach their goals and get a quality education, they're the ones who move. Often children with disabilities that a particular school can't help, they move. And then today, Jack, the number one reason that parents are opting for school choice are the pornography that's in the school libraries, that's in libraries in general, what's being taught in schools for young children on sex and gender. They don't want it. So the number one issue in America, the parents want choices, as they say, the immorality that's taught in some of our schools. And again, it's not everywhere, but I will tell you, Jack, we passed the library bill last week on school libraries. Jack, I have books in my hand. I don't think your TV station would allow me to show you the graphic pictures that are there for middle school students and copy. And I'm not saying this is what the book says. The book says porno is sweet and sugary. They direct children to find kinky websites where they can live out their fantasies. This is for middle school children. Parents are revolting against this, Jack. Now, I'm very optimistic, more than I've ever been in the House, that we may get a school choice bill out from them. I don't know what it will look like. We'll have to go to conference and work it out. But I'm optimistic because that vote, when you look at the technical side of the vote, it's much closer to happening than ever before. But we'll see what happens.
I wanted to ask you about school safety and security. Senate Bill 11 looks like it may pass today in the Senate.
Yes, it will pass.
Are you satisfied that there is enough teeth in that legislation to make sure that school districts are complying with the provisions, for example, the security audits and other provisions in there to keep these campuses as safe as possible?
So, Jack, it's like any other law we pass. It depends on the people following it. And in this case, we're putting, and we agree with the House on this, I think we're both around the same number, $1.5 billion, closer to $1.5 billion to spend on school security. But let me tell you what, Jack, you can have all the security that you can spend on. But if someone leaves a side door open of a school building, then the whole thing breaks down. I was in Santa Fe when that tragedy happened years ago. I happened to be near the school that day. I was one of the first people there on the scene. And I immediately looked at the school and said, there's too many doors here. There's just too many doors. And we put in $100 million, Jack, back then for school security. And when Uvalde happened, there was still 15 million that had not been taken down by school districts around the state, including Uvalde itself had not used all the money that was allotted to their school. And as we know, that shooter that day at Uvalde came in through a door that was unlocked and open because, or that he could get into because it was unlocked, a side door, because they were waiting for a caterer that day to bring food for a school party at the end of the season. So Jack, we can do everything we can, but we need every teacher, every student, every principal, every superintendent to buy in to maximize everything we can. So we're all in to do this. We allow school districts that want to allow teachers to carry. We allow them to use metal detectors. I helped put metal detectors in Santa Fe. My wife and I bought some of those metal detectors, and the company dedicated the rest of those. They're working well down there. But a lot of school districts say, we don't want metal detectors. Our parents don't want it. We don't want to look like a prison. We don't want to do this. We don't want to do that. So we have over 8,000 campuses, Jack. We can give them the money. We can give them the recommendations that Robert Nichols has in his bill, but they have to follow through. Our teachers and our students deserve to be safe.
But doesn't
the parents need to know their children are safe? Sorry.
But no, it's okay. But doesn't the bill have compliance requirements in there so that school districts have to do that?
Yeah, Jack, we do everything we can on a lot of issues. I'll simplify this. We have bills here that say it's illegal to speed. People speed. We have bills that say you can't rob a bank. People rob banks. I mean, we can pass laws, but we have to have the follow-up. In this case, we'll follow up with our schools and ask them to be accountable to do all of these things. But there are 8,000 campuses out there, and we have to depend on parents. We have to depend on those who run those school districts and those schools to follow up and let us know when things don't happen. We don't have 8,000 inspectors to go to every school, so they have to use the funding wisely as we recommend, and we will, and the TEA will hold them accountable. Look, every superintendent, every principal, every teacher wants to do their very best to save and protect their children. But we have to take this serious because we've heard it every time. We never thought it would happen here. We have to get beyond that thinking.
I wanted to ask you about a difference in the bills between the Senate and the House on increasing the penalty to a felony for illegal voting. Both the Senate, you passed Senate Bill 2 very early on.
First bill I think we passed.
And the difference with the House bill that's working its way through right now is in the Senate, the bill says ignorance is not a defense for someone who's ineligible to vote. The House is going to keep the intent that was passed in 2021 in its version. So, yeah,
well, Jack, first of all, let me go ahead, finish your question.
My question is, thank you so much. Why is intent not important at this time?
Jack, first of all, and you're a great reporter, you ask great questions, but remember, every one of these bills, and we get questions, the reason I said, let's talk later in the session than early, it's a process, Jack, and bills go through, they're filed, they're amended in one chamber, amended on the floor, go to the other house, and then they go to conference. So we'll see what the final language is. Here's the bottom line, Jack. Back in the last session, we passed the strongest election integrity bill in the country. And the House amended, and this is why I say it's a process, on the last day or so to reduce the crime of voter fraud from a felony that it had always been a felony, Jack, always been a felony, to a Class A misdemeanor. And then we went into a special session. Neither the governor or I were happy about that. That's not what was in the bill. And so the governor put it on a special session call to restore it back, which we did last time. We restored it. And the House just said, we don't have time to deal with it. So they've stayed at Class A misdemeanor. So in terms of the language and what you're trying to get into the weeds, the important weeds, by the way, that will all work itself out. But I'm glad the House understands we have to restore it back to a felony. It should have never been reduced to begin with.
Was there a recommendation by the Attorney General to reduce it to a misdemeanor? Because absolutely. Look, I can't speak for him.
Absolutely not, as far as I know. In fact, Jack, there was another, I call it a poison pill. Poison pill in a bill is when you really weaken it. And so there was another poison pill that would have really taken the Attorney General out of going after voter fraud. And I know it clearly because I worked with the Attorney General that next to last day in the regular session. And he actually wrote a letter to the Speaker and said, if you don't fix this, I won't be able to prosecute voter fraud at all. And so they did change that. But there were two poison pills in that bill. One was to reduce from a felony to a Class A misdemeanor, and the other was to take the Attorney General out of the equation. Now, since then, a court has taken the Attorney General out of the equation, and we're trying to correct that.
Two other questions, if I may, and I appreciate your time.
Sure.
One is on local control. A bill
Yes.
Passed yesterday in the House that would basically preempt various local regulations and try to make it more consistent for businesses to operate from city to city. How do you respond to mayors of cities who've criticized this and saying you're taking away the city's individual power to improve their cities for citizens?
So the answer is very simple. Texans need to know what the law is pretty much consistently across the state. When you go from city to city and you travel wherever you may, or if you have a business and you're opening in another town. And when one city is drastically different than another, it makes it difficult for the citizens and businesses in order to run their businesses. But most importantly, Jack, and this was mostly in big blue cities that had all types of mandates. And Houston and Harris County were two of the worst, quite frankly, with the county judge down there, Lena Hidalgo, just pretty much taking over people's lives. Look, the state of Texas, at the end of the day, all the people who vote for a mayor or vote for a county judge or commissioner, they also vote for us, as statewide officials, the governor, myself, and those of us who run statewide. So when they say, well, get out of our business, I represent those voters too. And those voters reach out to us. And many aren't happy, particularly in big blue cities, of some of those ordinances that are passed or some of those things that occurred during COVID. So that's why we that's why we support this bill.
And I wanted to ask you—
Time for your last question. Okay.
Yes. And I wanted to ask you, is any effort to legalize sports betting in Texas and creation of casino resorts in various parts of the state, is that just dead on arrival in the Senate?
So, Jack, here's what I've said since last November. We just don't have the votes for it in the Senate. And the best example of that, and you know how the process works, no one ever filed a bill in the Senate for casinos. That means if a casino bill comes over, there's no one who even wanted to file one, no one to pick up the bill. So, and the reason it wasn't filed is because a senator who was thinking about it couldn't find any votes for it. We do have a sports betting bill that was filed, but as my vote count, and my vote counts better than anyone's because I know what people tell me, we have 2 votes for it. In this Texas Senate, you need 18 votes to bring a bill to the floor. And I'm just counting Republicans because we're not going to let the Democrats take the lead on this and pass a bill with their majority. We're a Republican state. So you have to have 2/3 vote, Jack, for a constitutional amendment, and that would be 21 votes. And right now, of my 19 Republican senators, only 2 say that they would vote for it. So you can run the math here, Jack. No votes for casinos. No one's asked me. No one has said they want to support it. And 2 votes for sports betting.
And you don't support it either, right?
Jack, I've never said where I am. What I've always said, because here's the trick, Jack. If I were to say, well, I'll look at a bill if the members want it. Well, then the lobbyists, and they have almost 100 lobbyists between the 2. The casinos, I think, have 80 lobbyists. They would just be, if you were a senator, Jack, they'd be in your office. Well, the lieutenant governor said he's for it. Or the lieutenant governor said he'll look at a bill. And then they put pressure on you. So I don't put pressure on my members to say I'm for or against something that's an issue that a lot of people feel strongly about on both sides. I let them make the decision and have that freedom. And I told the casinos and I've told the sports owners, I've met with them all. I said, if I have 15 or 16 of my 19 Republican senators who come to me and say, hey, I've got the votes for it, that's when they'll find out where I stand. But I don't put that kind of pressure on the members. Jack, my form of leadership is listen to the people. Where's the high ground on the issues? What do the people want us to do? Where are the members? What are the big issues important to them? And I will tell you that, well, again, some people are strongly against it. Some people are strongly for it. The bottom line is it's not on the top 25 of anybody's list for anything. They're worried about getting more property tax relief that we're going to give them in our bill. They're worried about school choice. They're worried about the grid, which we haven't talked about. We need more natural gas power. They're worried about pornographic books in their school libraries. Jack, they're worried about drag queen shows for kids. They're worried about gender modification surgery on children. They're worried about defunding police in big cities. They're worried about a whole host of things. And building a casino or betting on a sports app is not on that list of anyone in terms of being one of their top priorities. Not in the Senate anyway.
Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, as always, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Hey, Jack. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Texas House Democrats are holding rallies across the state this weekend, including in Plano. They say they're pushing back on legislation approved by Republicans that would push Texas backwards.
I think it's really important for all of us, and not just Democrats, for just people in general, to start sounding alarm.
Texas House Democratic Caucus Vice Chair Gene Wu of Houston says he's sounding the alarm over dozens of bills Republicans will likely pass during the legislative session. Among them, Senate Bill 17, which passed this week. If also approved by the House, it would prohibit state colleges and universities from maintaining or establishing a diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI office, and certain training for DEI.
These programs were set up so that everybody has a fair shot. By taking these programs away, it means that the people who have been historically discriminated against may not have a fair shot again.
The author of the Senate bill defended it as it was being debated.
DEI programs have been shown to be exclusive. They have been shown to be ineffective. And they have shown to be politically charged.
Democrats also sharply criticized another bill passed, Senate Bill 16, that won't allow faculty at state colleges and universities to compel students to believe that one race, sex, ethnicity, political or religious belief is better than any other. They also oppose House Bill 900, which is now passed. That seeks to keep books with sexually explicit material out of public school libraries. But Wu says he believes it's just the start.
Book by book, there have been examples of books that shouldn't have been in schools, but they're using that as an excuse to do a blanket ban on so many other different things.
Republican legislator Jared Patterson of Frisco denied that during the session.
This is not a race issue or anything like that. This is a problem with sexually explicit material.
Here's more of our conversation with Texas House Democratic Caucus Vice Chair, State Representative Gene Wu of Houston.
I think it's really important for all of us, and not just Democrats, for just people in general, to start sounding alarm that the Texas legislature is about to roll back a lot of rights for a lot of communities, rights that we've been fighting for and sometimes even dying for 100 years.
And is there specific legislation, specific bills that you're referring to that people should be aware of?
No, absolutely. We have legislation that would create a secret police force that would round up immigrants. We have laws that would basically push Black and Latino students from having an equal chance of attending universities or employees being hired. We have more legislation that would strip rights away from women. We have laws that would ban books. We have laws that would censor history. I mean, we can go on and on and on. There's just bill after bill after bill that basically strips rights from our communities.
And some of these bills have already passed one chamber or the other. So what is the goal of these rallies that you're planning on holding?
You know, our biggest fear is that all these drastic changes are being made in the middle of the night, that the public is not even aware, that the public won't have a chance to voice their opinion. And I think the overwhelming majority of Texans oppose these kind of changes of such extreme nature. And we want more civil rights, not fewer.
And I wanted to ask, because I know one of the issues has been to increase the penalty for illegal voting. I know there are other election measures being passed as well. Can you talk to me a little bit about some of your concerns there? I know in the Senate version of the bill, Senate Bill 2, to make illegal voting a felony again, that it would strip away intent. And so that ignorance is no defense, is what that bill is saying. Is that included in this?
Yeah, absolutely. And our ability to vote, our ability for communities to express their voice and their choice is fundamental to our civil rights. And it's one of the most important civil rights. And anything that continues on this path of trying to scare people into not voting, into making simple, common everyday mistakes, turning those into criminal acts, that's what we oppose. We should be free to speak our voice and be free without just the fear of state overreach.
And you mentioned the, I believe it was House Bill 20, as far as the police force down at the border. That's what you're referring to, right?
Yeah, and it's absolutely not at the border. This is, and I think this is why we need to have a rally to let people know how extreme these things are. This is a statewide police force operating in every part of the state that is not made up of police officers, that is unaccountable to anyone but the governor, and is completely immune to all civil and criminal liability. Think about that.
And so let me ask you this, because 2 years ago, the House Democrats broke quorum, and that led to obviously 3 special sessions. Are you considering such a move again?
Well, number one, if we were, we wouldn't be talking about it. But look, Democrats are going to do everything they can to prevent the rollback of these rights. I mean, these are rights that our communities have fought for, to be at the table, to be free from random police persecution, to be free from all these different things, to speak our minds, to learn history, everything else. We've fought for this so long, we're not going to back away so easily. We're going to use every tool we have available.
And you mentioned, I believe, what the DEI legislation that was passed in the Senate yesterday. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about the most egregious parts of the bill in your mind.
Look, there's so much in the legislation. The most important way to understand this is these DEI programs are programs created to correct the century of racial injustice and inequity for many groups, not just on racial grounds, but for disabilities, for the community who's disabled, for veterans who might get discriminated against, for any number of things, including just women. These programs were set up so that everybody has a fair shot. By taking these programs away, it means that the people who have been historically discriminated against may not have a fair shot again, going back to the battle times, that they would not have a fair shot of getting into college or getting a job at a university.
And I also wanted to ask you, you mentioned library books. I know that bill is advancing in the House, a similar bill passed in the Senate. What is your major concern there that people should be aware of?
I think in the guise of protecting children, we are passing legislation on ideological grounds, that we're putting into place the ability to ban books, ban teaching, ban ideas that don't conform to right-wing conservative views, that anything that talks about Black history, Latino history, anything that talks about being gay, anything that talks about just other community groups that are not the mainstream are going to get banned. Slowly, piece by piece, one by one, they're all coming for it. And we see this in other states already.
I know that the Republicans have talked about in their books, they've really based it mostly on the sexual nature of some of the photos, some of the discussion in the books, et cetera. And it hasn't been, when you talk about, let's chat about that. I mean, what do you say to that? They say these books are inappropriate for the ages of the school, that they're in the school library.
No, so in book by book, there may be having examples of books that shouldn't have been in schools, but they're using that as an excuse to do a blanket ban on so many other different things. It did not just include pictures and things like that. This ban would include not only things that people would say are pornographic or anything like that, but things that would be instructional, anything that just offends people's senses, that goes against community norms, right, would be included in the legislation.
And so you're saying that would even be as it relates to history, or is that part of what was passed last session as far as what's called CRT?
No, I think it's all of the above. All these laws play together and act together. I mean, we have, and the CRT attack is not over. There are plenty of pieces of legislation that continue to go after not only what teachers can teach, but what books are allowed in the library on topics of race, and how to get rid of books like that. And we have seen this in other states where, like, books about Rosa Parks are being banned. Books about MLK are being banned. I mean, I know one state banned a book called Everyone Loves Dim Sum, that just encourages and supports diversity. These things are antithetical to a lot of right-wing members.
And my last question to you, and I appreciate your time, Representative, and that is just as far as it relates to women's rights. Are you referring to the state's abortion laws?
No, it's not just the abortion law that was passed last time, but it's also new legislation that's being proposed right now that's moving through both bodies that would ban different forms of contraceptives, ban the abortion in pill form, that would criminalize all sorts of acts, including even assisting people going across state lines. Whatever it is, they are trying to restrict it further and further. Nothing will ever be enough for them.
And so do you think that these rallies will lead to change, or at least that these pieces of legislation we've discussed not pass both houses?
Look, we have to do everything we can. And the first step in fighting these bad bills is to get the public involved. The public at least has to put in its input, has to have its say. I think it's important for the public to come out to the Capitol and testify against these types of legislation. And our fear is that the public doesn't even know about it, that it's being done so quickly and so quietly that I don't think people even know, and we need to sound the alarm.
Texas House Democratic Caucus Vice Chair and State Representative Jean Wu of Houston, thank you so much. We appreciate your insight today.
Thanks for having me.
That's Eye on Politics for this week. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jack Fink. You're watching CBS News Texas.